Welcome to chapter 14. This chapter is on paraphilias. And paraphilias are compulsive sexual activities that are practiced by a small percentage of people, and that most members of a given culture would consider abnormal, deviant, or pathological in nature. So we're going to begin this lecture with some historical perspectives, like always, and then we will go ahead and define exactly what constitutes paraphilia, and then we'll talk about how they come about. And then we'll talk about all the different types of paraphilias that are out there, followed by how to treat them, and that will be chapter 14. So let's get started. In 1886, a gentleman by the name of Richard von Krafft-Ebing wrote one of the first medical texts detailing paraphilias, and he named it Psychopathia Sexualis. And in it, he discussed 237 case studies that influenced researchers like Sigmund Freud. And actually, in that book, a lot of terminology was developed that's still used today. At that time, he considered oral and anal sex, masturbation, and homosexuality paraphilias. Of course, now those things are not considered to be abnormal whatsoever. One of the case studies that he used to write his book was on zoophilia. So if you look at the slide here, you can see case study 229. A man was caught having intercourse with a hen. He was 30 years old and of a high social position. The hens had been dying, and the person responsible had been wanted. The judge asked the man the reason for such an act. The man said his genitals were too small to have coitus with a woman. Medical examinations showed his genitals were, in fact, extremely small. So it was cases like this that allowed Richard von Krafft-Ebing to write his very famous book. Okay, so when it comes to defining paraphilias, there are different criteria. In fact, there are 3 of them. The first is that the sexual behavior is engaged in for the purpose of sexual arousal or gratification. The second is that the behavior tends to be compulsive and recurrent. So compulsive behavior is defined as any behavior, sexual or otherwise, that a person is unable to control regardless of repeated attempts to do so. And then the third criteria is that a clear majority of people in a given cultural setting would consider the behavior to be strange, deviant, pathological, or abnormal. So the term pathological means any behavior seen as caused by sickness or illness. So formally diagnosing a paraphilia as a psychological disorder requires meeting several criteria found in the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders. For example, let's say there's a person that has been having recurring, intense, sexually arousing fantasies, sexual urges, or behaviors for at least 6 months. The person acted on those urges and the urges have caused distress or interpersonal difficulties. Then this would be considered a paraphilia. However, there are victimizing and non-victimizing paraphilias. And victimizing paraphilias don't require that the urges cause distress for a diagnosis. And of course, not all sexual disorders are paraphilias. For example, sexual addiction and hypersexual disorder, which we talked about in a previous chapter. But to review, sexual addiction is a term often used to refer to strong compulsive sexual behavior, and it's more correctly referred to as hypersexual disorder. So hypersexual disorder is usually defined as a non-paraphilic sexual compulsivity, an obsessive preoccupation with and compulsive need for sexual activity. Now, it's not technically considered a paraphilia, but a compulsion, because their behaviors are usually not considered to be abnormal or strange. People with hypersexual disorder spend an excessive amount of time thinking about and planning sexual behaviors. Their urges occur in response to anxiety, depression, or stress. And the disorder can lead to paraphilias or extramarital affairs, rape, and sexual harassment. Society is particularly harsh towards behaviors involving sex and uses these 4 criteria to determine abnormal sexual behaviors. 1, the behavior is harmful or destructive to the person engaging in it. 2, the behavior is illegal. 3, the behavior interferes with the person's ability to form and maintain loving, intimate, and sexual relationships with others. And 4, the behavior involves another person without that person's consent. So you can have consensual behavior, which is a behavior entered into voluntarily by all parties. And you can have victimless paraphilias, which harm no one, with the possible exception of the person performing the act. just to clarify. So we're going to go ahead and watch a video clip now that does a good job defining these paraphilias.
These are all the typical sexual attractions and behaviors. Then what is all this around it? They're called paraphilias. Para meaning besides, and philia referring to love. You may be thinking, isn't this a fetish? Fetishes are a type of paraphilia. It's attraction to body parts or inanimate objects. It's kind of like in geometry, the way that a square can be a rectangle, but a rectangle cannot be a square. Fetishes are the square. There are lots of fetishes. There are over 500 paraphilias. 500 plus ways that people experience love and pleasure beyond this. Pornophilia is erotic interest in turning someone into furniture. Don't worry, Stefan, I'm not going to skin you. Someone making obscene phone calls for erotic pleasure is called telephone scatology. This is not to be confused with another paraphilia known as scatology, referring to arousal by feces, better known as coprophilia. We're not going to demo that. The sexual desire to dress and act like a baby is paraphilic infantilism, or the adult baby syndrome. Trichophilia is specifically the diaper, a diaper fetishism. Plusiophilia is attraction to stuffed animals, the toys, not the taxidermy. Kleptophilia, stealing for pleasure. Oculophilia, breast fetishism or masophilia, pygophilia, the butt. These are all different types of partialisms, a type of fetish where it's for a specific non-genital body part. The most common paraphilias are frauderism, rubbing on a non-consenting person. Sadism, pleasure from inflicting pain. Masochism, pleasure from the pain, which can also be psychological. Transvestic fetishism is wearing the clothing of the opposite sex. Exhibitionism is exposing oneself. Voyeurism, watching others undress, be naked, or having sex. Antagonistophilia. The seventh of the most common paraphilias is pedophilia, sexual arousal, attraction, and gratification derived from prepubescent kids. This is not to be confused with hebephilia, which is early to mid-puberty, or ephebophilia, which is late puberty. This book, well, the professionals and scholars that put it together and the preceding editions, has the say on when a paraphilia is unhealthy. The psychiatric community uses the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders to evaluate clients and patients. For short, it's called the DSM-5. It's a guidebook for a lot of mental disorders. It's also the guidebook to determine when a paraphilia is disordered. Mainly answering the question, is it causing or risking harm, impairment, or distress to anyone? If yes, get treatment. If no, confirm consent. Even when a paraphilia isn't harmful, it can still be qualified in a variety of ways. One system describes 3 levels, paraphilias that are optional, preferred, and exclusive. Optional, which is kind of a take it or leave it system. Preferred, where the person would rather incorporate the paraphilia into their sex play than not. And exclusive, where the only means of sexual gratification, attraction, or arousal are going to come when that paraphilia is present. The paraphilia is not there, not getting off. My hope is that with increased awareness about paraphilias, people won't be ashamed of their differences or their requests for something specific. They'll get help if they need it, and they'll meet communities that understand them. Paraphilias, no shame. The website fetlife.com is a community where this is already the reality. Link below. Let us know which paraphilias are most intriguing to you in the comments, and stay curious.
So there is actually a pretty large gender difference when it comes to paraphilic behavior. In fact, nearly all people that engage in paraphilias are men. So all paraphilias are more common in men than they are in females. The only exception to this is sexual masochism, which is sexual gratification from receiving pain. And this is found in women more than other paraphilias. However, it is still more common in men. So Kraft, Ebbing, and others often attribute a high sex drive in males to explain this gender difference. But some people argue that if this is true, why do so few men have paraphilias? The gender difference could be explained by culture. In Western cultures, men are given greater permission to be sexual in their thinking, language, and behaviors, and overt sexual behaviors in men are encouraged. So maybe it's not such a huge leap to express their urges through paraphilias, where it would be a huge leap for a woman. In cultures where sex is viewed primarily for reproduction, there are actually less cases of paraphilia, which kind of lends itself to this argument of the environment having a role in the gender differences in paraphilias. So nobody knows for sure what causes paraphilias, Most people agree that paraphilias are not thought to have a biological cause alone, but are developed mostly through the environment. However, someone can have a genetic predisposition to compulsive behaviors in general. So there's lots of different theories on how we develop paraphilias. The first one is brought to us by Sigmund Freud, and so it is called the psychodynamic theory of paraphilias. And Freud argued that paraphilias are caused by traumatic events that occur in childhood, somewhere between the ages of birth and 10 years old, kind of our formative years. He says that these events have been repressed into the unconscious, so the person may not even be aware that these events happened. The repressed traumas then manifest themselves in paraphilias in adulthood. For example, a man with voyeurism may have walked in on his parents having sex as a child and was punished harshly for it. Most modern-day psychologists disagree with Freud's theories, but do agree that paraphilias to an extent may be due to childhood experiences. So another theory are behavioral theories of paraphilias, and these are based on classical conditioning and operant conditioning theories. For example, this theory argues that repeated pairings of a specific fragrance with sexual thoughts or behaviors, for example, could create a certain paraphilia where a certain smell arouses a person, and this would demonstrate classical conditioning. In terms of operant conditioning, psychologists argue that the reward of orgasm reinforces abnormal behaviors. So let's say that you are masturbating while looking at a manila envelope and you get an orgasm, and classical conditioning has created an association in your brain between masturbation and the manila envelope, but the orgasm itself, as part of operant conditioning, has acted as a reward for masturbating while looking at that manila envelope. So this, according to behavioral theories, could now have created a attraction to manila envelopes, for example. So these two theories combine to create paraphilia, which basically says these theories basically associate a strange stimuli with sex through pairings, and then the orgasm reinforces the pairings, like I just described. And then the last theory is the biological theories of paraphilias, and so these theories, again, are kind of in conjunction with environmental theories, but basically one argument in the biological theory is that maybe paraphilias are due to an overproduction of male hormones like testosterone and adrenaline, or a low production of serotonin. We do know that medication that lowers testosterone production and increases serotonin has been found to decrease the paraphilic urges to a more manageable level. In one study, psychologists gave adrenaline to men with pedophilia and without. 3 hours later, the pedophiles produced much higher levels of testosterone. So there is obviously a relationship between adrenaline and testosterone. So these theories are often combined to explain the origins of paraphilias, but in short, we don't know exactly what does cause them. However, let's watch a video clip now that talks more about the causes of paraphilias. It talks about them from the angle of fetishes, but it's applicable to all paraphilias.
Feet, water sports, beards, spanking, crying, furry mascot outfits. What do all these things have in common? They're fetishes, which is another word for things some people like for reasons most people don't even consider.
Don't judge, Morty. Okay.
Feet can be pretty smelly and gross, right? I don't enjoy looking at them longer than I have to, but my feet are weird. And anyway, have you ever wondered why some people don't care about the fungus or hairy toes and actually enjoy feeling, touching, and looking at feet? Looking at you, Quentin Tarantino. The reason is because of a fetish, and I'm here to answer your questions about why we have them. Hey everybody, I'm Mark Crater, and welcome to the Science Faction Show. Be sure to ask your science questions in the comment section down below. Today, we are looking at fetishes and why they exist. Let's get right to the facts. The word fetish itself carries a lot of symbolic power. It's derived from an old Portuguese merchant word, feitiço, which was coined to describe powerful amulets and objects from Africa. Since then, the word has been adopted in the modern sense to mean something a little different, meaning an object that is overvalued by its owner so that they project meaning onto it that goes beyond their physical purpose. Thanks to psychologist Sigmund Freud, a fetish is best known as an ordinary object or act that is given sexual properties causing arousal. Justin Lee Miller, sex educator and research psychologist at Harvard, states that a fetish is, and I quote, "it's being aroused by something that is not arousing to the majority of people." And seeing that feet, shoes, and quicksand are on the list of known fetishes people have, I'd certainly agree with them. Fetishes and why they exist is a subject of big debate in the science world. There are a lot of theories why they happen. Fetishism has a history of being labeled as a sign of mental illness, but it's come to be classified as just a description of a mental state. Now, it's a common notion among researchers that fetishes develop at an adolescent age. Often, a fetish can stick with a person for the rest of their life. Lee Miller states that a fetish can develop from learned association between a certain object and sexual pleasure. So, someone once smelled fresh leather on a shoe and went from 6 to midnight, and it stuck. That's one way we get our fetishes, if shoes are what you're into. Fetishism can also be conditioned over time. When a person repeatedly comes into contact with that object right before experiencing sexual arousal, the object then signifies that arousal, transforming into a fetish. It's called the Pavlovian method. Now, Freud, he believed that fetishes are a part of the unconscious, acting as fantasies, which explains why a lot of people aren't open about their fetishes. They are buried deep down, but we might not know what to do with them. This also means fetishes are associated with escaping of reality. They let you run away from boring, everyday life. Run away! There are non-Freudian theories scientists have developed fetishes, including childhood events affecting how you see a certain object, temporal lobe dysfunction in the brain, or trauma leading to developing damaging fetishes. But how we develop fetishes seems to be a biological mystery, one that relies on how we react chemically through arousal to a certain object. What kinds of objects are we talking about? In October 2004, a research team at the University of Bologna compiled data over 3 years concerning the prevalence of fetishes among up to 5,000 people. Their findings revealed that body parts and functions made up the most popular fetishes, including feet, toes, and even urine. Hey, some people like what some people like.
That looks amazing.
That being said, fetishes can make people go to extreme lengths. In 2011, a guy in Arkansas known as the Toe Suck Fairy was arrested for approaching women to, yeah, you guessed it, suck on their toes. We have no concrete explanations for fetishes, but they can make people do things like that. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Be sure to like and subscribe and check out the other awesome videos we have on this channel. Stay geeky.
Okay, so you've heard a bunch of different theories now on what causes paraphilias. So for lecture activity number 1, I'd like for you to tell me which theories you most agree with. So first you have the psychodynamic theory, which was brought to us by Freud. Then you have the behavioral theories of paraphilias, and then finally you have the biological theories of paraphilias. So if you need to review the part of this lecture where we discussed those, or read about them in your book, and then let me know in 2 to 3 sentences which one you most agree with and why for lecture activity 1. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the specific paraphilias that exist. So there are 2 main sets of paraphilias, victimizing paraphilias and non-victimizing. We're going to start with the victimizing paraphilias. So these are sexual activities involving an unsuspecting, non-consenting, or unwilling person as the target of the atypical compulsive behavior. The fact that this person does not consent acts as a motivating factor. It's part of what produces the thrill. And since this involves a non-consensual person, these paraphilias are illegal in most states. So the first one we're going to discuss is voyeurism, which is secretly watching others undress or engage in sexual activities without their knowledge or consent for the purpose of achieving sexual arousal. So sometimes people that engage in voyeurism are referred to as peeping toms. And this can have negative effects on the victim that are similar to the negative effects of sexual assault. We have seen an increasing number of hidden camera cases in locker rooms, bathrooms, dressing rooms, etc. But due to technology and all the camera surveillance that is out there, this technology has also been helpful in catching people engaging in voyeurism. So let's watch a clip now of a case where exactly this happened. The victim was able to catch the peeping Tom using video surveillance and actually confronts them.
Here at home covering Polk County tonight, Newport Richey police are hoping someone will recognize this man seen in the surveillance video. He's suspected of peeping into at least 2 homes early on Wednesday morning.
ABC Action News reporter Eric Waxler talked with one of his targets that confronted him face to face.
Came up and did this, walked up like this, and went right up to my window like this.
Jelena Morales hopes the man who tried to peep in the window of her Newport Richey apartment is caught very soon.
He knew that there was females in his house. He came right from over here. He knew exactly what he wanted.
Morales, 2 other women, and 10-year-old daughter were all home early Wednesday morning. Her security cameras were rolling too, and you can see as a man walks up on her front porch and goes over to the window.
I was inside watching in the cameras.
Morales quickly came outside and confronted the man, who she says gave rambling excuses about why he was there. She eventually scared him off, and he took off on a bike. Now Newport Richey police are looking for the peeping Tom, described as a middle-aged man with a Spanish accent. He's also suspected of looking into another nearby home around the same time while fondling himself.
We shouldn't have to fear every day to have somebody coming up on our porch or even attempting to even approach anything that has to do with something that's not his, and to violate my privacy as a female, to look through my window. And I feel very violated. I feel very violated.
Morales and her friends happen to be loading a moving truck today. They already had plans to leave this apartment complex for a new home, but their encounter with this man helped convince them it was time to go. In Newport Richey, Eric Waxler, ABC Action News.
Another victimizing paraphilia is called exhibitionism, and this is achieving sexual arousal and gratification by displaying one's genitals to others without the victim's consent. Sometimes this is referred to as a person that engages in this is referred to as being a flasher. And the flasher is usually between the ages of 16 and 40. Often they expose genitals to a woman they don't know while masturbating, or they just expose the genitals and then masturbate later and use kind of the memory as a stimuli for sexual arousal while they're masturbating. Sometimes exhibitionism involves voyeurism or obscene telephone calls. The person usually does not desire any physical touch with their victim. If someone flashes you, the best thing to do is ignore them, stay calm. The more kind of panicked you get, the more aroused they get. And then immediately file a police report. So here is a news report of a man that was going into, I believe, a cafe and engaging in exhibitionism and was also caught on camera.
Surely you know the guy, curly blonde hair, probably about 6'1".
But it's not his face or his height that's causing a stir at the McAllister's Deli in Carmel.
And you'll see him look down his little he'll say, hey. Oh, is it out? Yep, it's out. Okay.
That's right, his privates.
Here's a video of it hanging out. I think that's what it is. It's what it's got to be, man.
Out on full display inside a diner where families are trying to eat lunch.
Wow, that is terrible. You know, I have children. That's not a conversation I want to have with my kids.
I would probably get up and probably smack them. Like, no, that's not okay. Not okay.
It's pretty sad.
Restaurant manager Ryan Penrod sharing security footage that captured the suspect carefully plotting his visual assault.
I watch him move his coat in front of it because someone's about to come by. The last time he came in, he acted like he was on his phone too. That guy's not on his phone. That's just his distraction.
A cover to help him blend in until he finds the right target.
Looking south. Yep, we're all intact. We're ready to go.
Only Wednesday afternoon, he was recognized trying to pull the same stunt in front of a woman he'd already flashed in August.
Getting his kicks, I guess.
Only this time he was kicked out of the deli. Now police are looking into the matter.
All right, and then the next victimizing paraphilia is frauderism, and this is rubbing one's genitals against a non-consenting person for sexual arousal and typically orgasm. The person that engages in this usually fantasizes that they have a loving, intimate relation with the person, but then they run away after the act. And the act usually violates sexual assault laws, and the person can be criminally charged because they're actually contacting another person. Usually a person that engages in frauderism is between the ages of 15 and 25, and the behavior typically decreases as the person gets older. So the person often believes their victim is unaware of the act or enjoying the act, but usually the victim is actually too shocked, afraid, or even embarrassed to take action or do anything. However, that's not the case in the next clip we're going to watch, where a woman that was a victim of frauderism actually did take action. So let's check it out.
ABC 15's Angie Cayley, you're at Fry's Mercado on McDowell, where at least one woman says he touched her.
Rubbed up behind her, from behind her, she says, and she not only reported him, she managed to do something that may just crack this case.
As soon as I put up my phone to take a picture, that's when he looked straight into the camera and then he took off.
Bianca Sarmiento says she's the one who snapped these crystal clear photos of the man suspected of touching women at stores in the valley.
He covered my eyes like this, like he didn't touch my face or anything, but I felt him like from behind me, like he put up like his private part on my behind.
Sarmiento says the guy then called out a name like he knew her. They don't know each other, of course, but he acted like it.
It clicked to my head. I remembered that all that was happening at Fry's, that it's been happening and they've been trying to catch that guy. And the only thing that ran to my head was like, snap a picture.
Just a really good photo.
Sergeant Jamie Rothschild says a photo like this, coupled with this grainy surveillance video of the suspect's car, will be helpful in tracking him down. Rothschild says there are 3 confirmed cases, all involving this man, and he did something similar each time.
He got so close that the victims felt immediately uncomfortable. His body definitely impacted their body, and there was some touching involved.
Sarmiento says she was with her small children at the time. She worries what else this man is capable of if he could do this to a young mother in a public place.
If he's doing this, like what can he do next? Like he can like want to do more.
Now, police say there may be more incidents that have not been reported yet. If you help police find this man, you may be eligible for a reward. The number to silent witness is on our website, abc15.com. Back to you.
She thought incredibly fast and had that cell phone ready. Angie, thank you.
All right, and then the last victimizing paraphilia we're going to discuss is sexual sadism, and this is inflicting pain, injury, or humiliation on another person for sexual gratification of the person performing the action. So sexual sadism includes acts such as dominating, tying up, blindfolding, beating, cutting, whipping, strangling, mutilating, and even killing another person during sexual activities. So part of the excitement for the sexual sadist is seeing the victim absolutely terrified. There are consensual variations of sexual sadism where people that are engaging in mutual sex play like this have safe rules and agreed upon boundaries. So there's something called sadomasochism, which is sexual activities that combine sadism and masochism. And then there's BDSM, which are sexual activities that combine bondage, discipline, and sadomasochism. These activities are more common than other paraphilias, and there's thriving industries that sell products for BDSM, such as whips, chains, handcuffs, leather costume, etc. But again, these behaviors like BDSM and sadomasochism are safer, and the person that is kind of playing the more passive role actually has a lot of say in what's going on, and they're able to use safe words to stop the behavior, and there's boundaries that are agreed upon so that no one actually gets hurt. However, sexual sadism by itself is a victimizing paraphilia, with the intent being to terrify the victim. So we're going to watch a video clip now on perhaps one of the worst cases of sexual sadism I've ever seen. So be warned that there is explicit and disturbing content, but it's the case of the Cleveland kidnapper, or his name was Ariel Castro, if you've ever heard of that. So let's watch a clip now.
The horrors they endured are unimaginable, and only they can really ever know what went on in that house. But for the 3 women held captive by Ariel Castro, today was a day of catharsis and relief. Now it is his turn to be a prisoner. But before he's shut away forever, his victims got a chance to say their piece. Here's ABC's Alex Perez.
He is perhaps one of the most evil men in America. But before Ariel Castro was sent away to serve his life plus a 1,000-year prison sentence, one of his victims had a chance to confront her tormentor in a packed Cleveland courtroom.
I will overcome all this that happened, but you will face hell for eternity. From this moment on, I will not let you define me or affect who I am.
Michelle Knight spoke directly to her captor about her 11 years of living hell. As she spoke, Ariel Castro's eyes never left her. But this is the moment he registered emotion.
You said at least I didn't kill you. For you took 11 years of my life away, and I have got it back. I spent 11 years in hell. Now your hell is just beginning.
Knight said she's no longer afraid of Ariel Castro.
As you think about the 11 years and atrocities you could inflict it on us, what does God think of you hypocritically going to church every Sunday, coming home to torture us? The death penalty will be so much easier. You don't deserve that. You deserve to spend life in prison. I can forgive you, but I'll never forget.
This could be the last time we'll ever hear from Castro, who pled guilty to 937 counts to avoid the death penalty for kidnapping, rape, and assault. Michelle Knight was 21 years old when Castro lured her in with promises of a puppy for her son. Amanda Berry, 16 when she was abducted. Today, she's 27. Gina De Jesus, just 14 when the ordeal began, now 23. The horror surrounding this case reaching yet a new level today as he appeared to defend his actions.
I just want to clear the record that I am not a monster. I did not prey on these women. I just acted on my sexual instincts because of my sexual addiction. And God is my witness. I never beat these women like they're trying to say that I did. I never tortured them.
The horror began in this Cleveland neighborhood more than 11 years ago. Ariel Castro lured the three young women into his car, kidnapping them while raping and brutally abusing them for years. Their parents held vigils. Police searched, but the girls were never found. Until this May, when a Good Samaritan heard Amanda screaming for help. This was Amanda Berry's frightening sound of freedom.
Help me, I'm Amanda Berry.
You need police, fire, or ambulance?
I need police.
Okay, and what's going on there?
I've been kidnapped and I've been missing for 10 years and I'm here, I'm free now.
Castro spoke to his captives.
You guys know all the harmony that went on in that home.
And the sex, according to Castro, was not rape.
All of it was consensual.
A claim that was dismissed by the judge. Castro told the court he too was a victim of sexual abuse.
I am not a violent predator that you're trying to make me look a monster. I'm not a monster. I'm a normal person. I am just sick. I have an addiction. Just like an alcoholic has an addiction.
Also revealed today, photos of Castro's house of horrors showing his elaborate scheme to keep the girls hidden. Pounds of heavy chains, plastic toilets that were rarely emptied, and a pole in the center of the room where the women were often restrained. Castro continued to harp on the good time he and the girls were having at his home.
Because we had a lot of harmony going on in that home. And if you've seen the YouTube video of Amanda this weekend, that right there in itself proves that that girl did not go through no torture. Do you think she will be out there partying already or having fun? I don't think so.
His victims have stayed mostly out of sight since their escape. Today, family members spoke on their behalf.
Today is the last day we want to think or talk about this. These events will not own a place in our thoughts or our hearts. We will continue to live and love. She lives not as a victim, but as a survivor. Her insurmountable will to prevail is the only story worth discussing.
And then she spoke directly to Castro.
Que Dios Se apiade de su alma.
May God have mercy on your soul. Amanda Berry's sister, Beth Serrano, spoke about Amanda's desire for privacy for her and her daughter, fathered by Castro.
Amanda is not here today. She is strong, beautiful inside and out.
At a press conference today, the assistant prosecutor on the case gave us a glimpse inside Castro's misguided mind.
The restraints weren't just psychological who were on the women there, but it was also physical, and it was also daily. They were chained multiple times, multiple places.
I think what all of us are concerned about is he's a very good liar.
Castro is being kept in an isolated cell and will soon be transferred to a state prison.
112, 114.
He was sentenced to life in prison without parole on 2 counts of aggravated murder plus 1,000 years. For some, that's still not long enough. For Nightline, I'm Alex Perez in Cleveland.
The next victimizing paraphilia we're going to discuss is pedophilia, and this is defined as an uncontrollable sexual compulsion involving children. So a pedophile is an adult, who's usually male, whose sexual focus is on children, and pedophilia involves patterns of exploitation of prepubescent children for an adult's sexual purposes. There are cases of women molesting children, but it's far less common than men. So most child molesters are heterosexual, married, and have children of their own. They usually have marital difficulties and engage in alcohol abuse. Most of them were sexually abused as children. They tend to be depressed, describe themselves as lonely, are emotionally immature, have low self-esteem, and feelings of inferiority. About 4% of the population, or approximately 1 million Americans, are pedophiles. In terms of the victims, 65% are between the ages of 8 and 11. 90% either know or are related to their abuser. And side effects of being a victim of pedophilia include depression, suicide, alcohol addiction, PTSD, anxiety disorders, rape, subsequent sexual victimization, and divorce. In 2006, there were 81,000 reported cases of child sexual abuse, which was at that time a decline in the previous numbers. So some people argue that the reason for this decline is parents' increasing vigilance, laws like Megan's Law, how data is reported, and changes to sexual abuse laws. So in the 2000s, a flood of abuse cases involving Catholic priests were reported. And estimates of abuse cases involving Catholic priests over the last 50 years are somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 cases, which would constitute about 4 to 5% of Catholic priests engaging in pedophilia. The estimates of male victims range from 11,000 to 20,000 worldwide. And in April 2008, the Pope addressed the problem of pedophilia, prayed with the victims, and vowed to not allow Catholic priests that are pedophiles to be involved in the church. So let's watch a video now on pedophilia.
Eric Toth is serving a 25-year sentence at this federal prison. We spoke with him about his web of deception and how he stayed one step ahead of law enforcement for so long.
Someone who is really a predator.
This is somebody who's beyond looking at images. This is somebody who's created images.
You knew the FBI was looking for you.
Yes.
But why didn't you turn yourself in?
At first it was kind of a game. It was there was a certain element of, you know, I'm running for my life. It was almost like a long-term adrenaline high.
The game ended for Eric Toth, now an inmate at the federal prison in Petersburg, Virginia. But he's long been a prisoner of a mental disorder he says he can't control.
My prosecutor said I'm not a monster, I'm just a seriously disturbed individual, and sometimes I find myself agreeing with him.
The 32-year-old former teacher is a pedophile who told us his victims were all boys he loved to obsession.
Toth was an extremely dangerous individual.
For 3 years, Toth taught at Washington, D.C.'s Beauvoir, the National Cathedral Elementary School.
Well, honestly, honestly, I don't know exactly how many victims there were. The court record said 17.
Court records and interviews reveal that in June of 2008, a fellow Beauvoir teacher discovered a school-owned digital camera with sexually explicit photographs and videos of children. It was quickly traced to Toth.
So you do believe taking sexually explicit photos of children is wrong?
Yes, certainly taking sexually explicit photos of anybody without their permission is wrong.
Court records further indicate that Toth had installed hidden cameras inside air fresheners that he placed in school bathrooms.
I've made some horrible choices that have hurt people, and I've also made some choices that have helped people and helped the world.
He had skills which he developed as a counselor, as a tutor, that he utilized to gain the trust of parents, and then he capitalized on that to exploit the children that he was entrusted to guide.
When the pornographic images were discovered at Beauvoir, Toth was immediately escorted off campus and soon began a life on the run.
I definitely do regret my actions and feel sorry about them.
FBI accounts and letters to us detail an astonishing itinerary from Washington, D.C. to Indiana, where he grew up. After a brief stay, he traveled to Chicago, Madison, Wisconsin, and Minneapolis, where he abandoned his car at the airport, leaving behind a suicide note and a thumb drive containing child pornography. From there, he took a bus to Billings, Montana, where he lived in a rescue mission for a month. In July of 2008, he traveled to Wyoming and then hitched a ride back to Montana. Soon, he was on the road again to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, O'Brien, Oregon, and on to Phoenix, where he became a full-time live-in volunteer at a homeless shelter. Twice, Toth's case was featured on America's Most Wanted. After the second broadcast, someone recognized him, but he told us he intercepted an email warning the shelter he was a fugitive. From there, he took a bus to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and with a newfound friend, he headed to Dallas and then Austin, where he would work for 3 years in the computer industry.
An alleged child pornographer is...
In April of 2012, Eric Toth became the first pedophile on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list, taking the spot that had been occupied by Osama bin Laden. That, he told us, prompted him to make plans to leave the country.
I felt horrible. Actually, I felt as if I'd been kicked in the gut and that all the breath had left me. I actually curled up in bed and essentially didn't do anything for several days.
But for Toth, escaping arrest quickly became an adrenaline-filled cat and mouse game. And the law came incredibly close. In April of 2012, Toth says he was on a bus from Arkansas to Texas that was pulled over by Texas state troopers, who asked all the passengers for their identification. Toth thought the game was over. They looked at his fake ID and moved on. And in August of 2013, Toth obtained a fraudulent passport in Houston, photoshopping his own picture and even removing his distinctive facial mole, he says, to defy facial recognition software. He had his visa and passport expedited, claiming he was visiting Nicaragua to tend to an ill relative. He would later return briefly to the United States, ironically, to get documents for Nicaraguan citizenship validated at the consulate in South Florida. He then returned to Central America. Months later, Toth was captured in Nicaragua, where he told us he'd married a hotel maid to gain citizenship. He'd been turned in by an American who recognized him.
The police have been very professional. Thank you.
To what extent do you believe doing what you were convicted of is harmful to children?
Harm is an interesting word.
Toth grew up in a middle-class Midwestern family. At the age of 10 or 11, he realized he was attracted to young boys and could never tell anyone. In candid, graphic letters to us, Toth wrote, "When you have to lie about who you are every day, lying, manipulating, portraying a false you, etc., becomes pretty easy."
To what extent are you sorry for what you did, or are you simply sorry you got caught?
Well, I mean, I would be absolutely lying if I didn't say that pretty much any criminal is sorry that they get caught. The consequences aren't fun to deal with.
In his letters, Toth cites academic studies claiming that sexual contact between an adult and a child is not necessarily harmful.
That's correct. There is research that suggests that while it absolutely can be and frequently is harmful, that it does not have to be harmful. In a couple of studies in particular, they said the issue of willingness was central.
But experts say children cannot consent to any type of sexual activity with an adult.
Is a traumatic experience.
Dr. Allison Jackson says child abuse doesn't need to involve physical trauma to cause long-term harm.
Emotional scars and the emotional injury is usually the larger baggage that gets carried on for a lifetime.
I have this dark thing lurking in me that unfortunately is not easy to control.
Pedophilia is classified as a mental disorder, one for which experts say there is no cure and little to no effective treatment.
As a pedophile, I have kind of a dark inner secret that I have to deal with, and that unfortunately my efforts in dealing with it haven't always been effective.
When he's released, Eric Toth will be 52 years old. He faces a lifetime of supervision and is barred from any contact with children.
So now we're going to talk about non-victimizing paraphilias, and these are solitary activities or activities involving consensual adults. So the first one we're going to discuss is sexual masochism, which we mentioned earlier. And this is defined as sexual arousal and gratification that is associated with acts or fantasies of being hurt, humiliated, or otherwise made to suffer. So the person engages in acts voluntarily and then seeks them out. And these acts include being tied up, restrained, which is where the term bondage comes from, piercing with pins and needles, affixing clothespins or clamps to nipples or genitals, hanging weights from genitals, being whipped, beaten, strangled, shocked, verbally degraded, branding the skin, applying ice to bare skin, using wax on bare skin. So the term bondage is defined as being bound, tied up, or otherwise restrained during sexual activity, and this is typically a consensual activity with this type of paraphilia. So partners make agreements about the acts they desire. They assign specific roles and carry out scripted sequences of behaviors. The scenarios may include making love while being handcuffed and blindfolded, role-playing, or using costumes. Usually the humiliation and pain does not involve blood, broken bones, or leave any permanent marks. And this is legal because adults are consensual. One court actually likened it to boxing. So we're going to watch a video now that goes into more detail on sexual masochism.
Merriam-Webster defines kink as unconventional sexual taste or behavior. But what does unconventional actually mean? For some, it's a fetish, which can be anything from naked feet to rubber suits. Or it might involve power play or BDSM. The term sadism was popularized by an Austro-German psychologist who named it after a French writer, the Marquis de Sade, and characterized it as a form of perversion. And masochism was named for the Austrian novelist who wrote Venus in Furs. But bondage and sex toys have a long history. The earliest known dildo is estimated to be 28,000 years old. Scientists discovered fragments of the 8-inch long rod in a German cave. The Kama Sutra, a collection of ancient Hindu texts, mentions sexual spanking, slapping, and biting. And Japanese bondage, called kenbaku, dates back at least to the Edo period. BDSM might involve restraining partners with gags, collars, rope, leather handcuffs, scarves, or spreader bars. Partners might use hot wax, riding crops, suction cups, or nipple clamps to inflict pain. This can generate the same endorphins you might feel on a runner's high, or after orgasm. But toys can get expensive, so household objects, sometimes called pervertibles, can come in handy. Brushes can be used to tickle, hit, or insert, while shrimp deveiners, credit cards, and bamboo skewers can mimic the sensation of knives. Plus, lots of office supplies can be used to create sensation. Any clothes can be kinky clothes, but outfits might include heels, leather boots, uniforms, corsets, gloves, or catsuits. And dominants might put blindfolds or hoods on their submissives. Kinky activities might include sense deprivation, dirty talk, or electrification. One can be mummified with plastic wrap or bandages, spanked, or even suspended from the ceiling. Partners often stage scenes of sexual fantasies, playing different parts or bending the rules of gender roles. After all, those roles don't necessarily predict what people want. A 2009 study found that men and women both prefer fantasies of being dominated rather than doing the dominating. Consent is crucial. Partners often write a contract that lays out what they feel comfortable with and establish a safe word in case they want to stop. It's also important to establish safe practices and be aware of any potential risks. Sex of any kind can seem shrouded in privacy and judginess. Those who are too interested are labeled licentious, lascivious, lubricious, libidinous, or debauched. But actually, experimentation is pretty normal, and kink is going mainstream.
Okay, so the next non-victimizing paraphilia we're going to discuss is autoerotic asphyxiation, and this is a form of sexual masochism involving depriving the brain of oxygen, usually through some form of strangulation or hanging. It's usually a solo act where the person masturbates during, so while they're hanging themselves or depriving themselves of oxygen in some form, strangulation or whatever. Or another way that people engage in this is they will do the asphyxiation and then fantasize about it after and masturbate. This is potentially the most dangerous of all paraphilias because it is often fatal. There's another kind of version of autoerotic asphyxiation known as hypoxphilia, and this is when one partner chokes another during sex, but it is actually far less common than autoerotic asphyxiation. So this usually occurs in mostly males between 15 and 30 years old, but there have been cases of women engaging in it, but it's a very small number of cases. So it's thought that depriving the brain of oxygen increases sexual arousal and orgasm, but this is not true. Depriving the brain of oxygen actually causes dizziness. And so 1,000 estimated deaths per year are associated with autoerotic asphyxiation in the United States. But this number is thought to be low because when family members find a person that is died as a result of this behavior, they usually report it as a suicide due to embarrassment. However, one father that found his son, unfortunately deceased due to autoerotic asphyxiation, actually came forward in an effort to kind of educate the public on what this is and the dangers of it. So let's watch a video clip of that now.
It is a secret sex game that kills hundreds each year. I'm talking about autoerotic asphyxiation. It is said to have taken the lives of some pretty big stars too. Actor David Carradine died in 2009, found hanging in the closet of a hotel room, and the lead singer of INXS, Michael Hutchence, in a similar incident in a Sydney hotel room in 1997. For those who don't know, and this is not for the faint of heart, it is the act of choking yourself, usually by hanging, slowly slowing the oxygen to the brain while masturbating, and supposedly increasing sexual pleasure. Death by autoerotic asphyxiation is often covered up by the family of those killed, some even preferring to say it was suicide. Not our next guest, though. Ed DeJesus is a father whose 13-year-old son died while performing the sexual act on himself, and he wants other people to know about it. Ed, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
You doing okay?
You know, we're having quite a bit of trouble. We still don't want to accept that, you know, that he's gone. But I have a strong urge to get the word out and at least be able to tell kids, teachers, parents, whoever I can, so that, you know, if this saves one person, I would be more than happy.
Yeah.
It's just a terrible situation that we're going through.
We'll talk more about knowledge in just a little bit about informing people about this, but I want to go back and I want to find out what happened on that day last week. Your wife found your son's body. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, you know, we're divorced, and every Wednesday, Thursday they come. You know, I pick them up after school. I was at the grocery store and almost done grocery shopping, and I get a call, and it was my ex-wife on the phone, and she was hysterical and, you know, yelling on the phone. I couldn't understand what she said. My heart just about stopped. I knew something was wrong. I ran out of the store. She had told me that my son tried to kill himself. And from that point forward, you know, as a parent, you start to beat yourself up wondering, you know, what did you do wrong? That wasn't the case. You know, for about, I don't even know, about a 36-hour period, I had been doing research, going online, looking for this, looking for that. But basically what had happened was he had been doing his homework when she left. She dropped our girls off to cheerleading practice. She gets home, calls his name, he didn't answer, and went to his door. His door was locked. She unlocked it. She went into his room and found him in the closet. And from there, she actually started to perform CPR. And if it wasn't for what she had done, we wouldn't have had the time that we had to say goodbye. So I'm forever grateful for that.
Okay, the next non-victimizing paraphilia we're going to talk about is fetishism. And this is a sexual preference for non-human objects or a body part that most members of a culture do not consider sexual. So certain behaviors, parts of bodies, arousing settings, or items of clothing can all be part of a fetish. For example, things like feet, toes, pantyhose. If these things must be present to become aroused, then it constitutes a fetish. So a person, for example, may need their partner to wear high heels or prefer sexual activities with the high heels to actually having sex with a partner. The most common fetish objects include shoes, women's underwear and lingerie, feet and toes, and rubber and latex objects. However, a person can become sexually attracted to just about anything due to some of those behavioral theories of paraphilic causes that we discussed earlier. So with that in mind, let's watch a video clip about a man who had a fetish involving his car.
My name is Nathaniel. I'm 27 years old, and I'm in a serious relationship with my car.
Morning, baby. My handsome man.
Nathaniel is in a committed relationship with a car that he's named Chase. He met Chase in a resale lot about 5 years ago.
Love you, baby. It was love at first sight. His body and then his interior and everything just together just seemed to fit. And I just felt an instant connection.
Nathaniel's obsession first developed as a teenager when he would build model cars. But he didn't find true love until he met Chase.
I find this part of him the most sexy just because of the subtle lines and curves. I'll give him a kiss here and just kind of caress him down the side.
My initial reaction was, I was kind of shocked. It was kind of weird because it was just hard to understand.
Honestly, I don't know why I feel the way I do, but I just absolutely love Chase. We always have such a good time together. He likes a lot of the same music I do. We have a favorite song. It's Can't Fight This Feeling by REO Speedwagon. I do get him gifts. How you buy something for your fiance or your wife. And then usually for his birthday, I try to do something special for him too. The favorite date would be going to the lookout area. Just lean against him a little and just be with him mainly. Love you.
But Nathaniel's relationship with Chase goes beyond dates and presents.
We have our times when we get sexual.
Does that feel good? You're a handsome man. Love you, baby.
What we do the most often is I like to lean over his fender and across his hood and do little things like that and kind of press up against him and rub against him like that. One of his more bold positions is for me to be underneath him. He really likes that. It's very special to make love to Chase.
I love you.
I am worried for my friend because it's not normal, and you may have people that don't understand and make fun of you.
Nathaniel's so attached to Chase, he rarely lets anyone else drive him, and never lets Chase out of his sight for more than 24 hours.
There have been times it brought tears to my eyes because I wasn't with him. At work, his picture's on my desktop, so I see his face all the time. It really bothers me when he gets dinged or scratched. If something were ever to happen to Chase, my heart would just stop. I just have to gather myself here. I'm sorry for all that.
I am concerned for Nathaniel emotion-wise. I think life would be easier if he did change.
Love you.
Nathaniel's roommate Kim is one of the few people who know the full extent of his love life.
I guess the reason I don't tell a lot of people is because I don't know the response I'm going to get. I always worry about that little bit of disgust that somebody may have.
But Nathaniel's biggest fear is how his relationship could affect his career as a customer service technician.
I mean, if everybody found out, I'd be worried that it may affect my job. But I love him to death. I wouldn't trade him for the world.
Good night, baby. I love you.
Okay, the next non-victimizing paraphilia we're going to discuss is transvestic fetishism. And this is a paraphilia engaged in by a transvestite. It's also known as transvestic disorder. So there's a lot of terms here that we need to kind of decipher between. So the first one is cross-dressing. And this is dressing in clothes traditionally associated with the opposite sex. This is not necessarily a paraphilia because it is not done for sexual arousal and usually is not a compulsive behavior. A transvestite is usually a man who obtains sexual satisfaction by wearing female clothing. Transvestites are usually not gay men. In fact, 70 to 90% of transvestites are heterosexual men. When a gay man cross-dresses, it's usually for fun, for political statement, or entertainment. And this is what's often known as a drag queen. So 80% of transvestites are or have been married. And one study found that transvestites hid their fetishes from everyone and cite the following fears as reasons: being rejected by people close to them, being labeled queer, seen as mentally ill, and sinning against God. So 95% of transvestites perceive themselves as male and do not identify as a female. So this is different than a person who is transgender, because a person who is transgender dresses in what is traditionally considered opposite sex clothing as a way to make their gender that is on the inside match their physical appearance on the outside. But it is not done for sexual arousal. It is done in an effort to feel comfortable in their skin. Okay, let's watch a video now on transvestic fetishism.
Hi lingerie lovers, I'm Sammy Cole, and on this week's Undie Mondays, I'm talking about men wearing women's lingerie, why people do it, and how you can bring up trying this with your partner. Now before I go into why some men enjoy wearing women's underwear in the bedroom, there are a few distinctions that I have to make, particularly when it comes to clothing, gender identity, and sexual fetishism. Today I'm not really discussing drag artists or transgender people, slightly touching on the subject of cross-dressing, but this is mainly going to be about transvestites. But what do I mean by transvestites? Well, here are some dictionary definitions to help you get your head around what all of that means. Now, transvestite is usually used to refer to men who wear clothing that's often worn by women as part of a sexual kink or thrill. Some transvestites also wear items of clothing traditionally considered women's garments because it's an act of social defiance. Cross-dressing is a much broader term used to apply to anybody who regularly wears clothes that are more often associated with the opposite gender. Unlike transvestism, cross-dressing isn't necessarily about a sexual thrill. Sometimes it's as simple as just a fashion thing, or sometimes it can be a social statement, or it can simply be because they prefer that style of clothing. Now, as anyone who's been watching the latest season of RuPaul's Drag Race will know, drag is generally referred to an entertainer who dresses up in clothes more often associated with another gender. For example, drag queens are normally men dressed as women, and drag kings are women dressed as men. It's much more about an artistic expression and a form of entertainment than it is any sexual or personal preference. And then there's the term transgender, which you may have seen quite a lot in the headlines recently, whereas the other three choices I've spoken about generally refer to fashion choices or sexual preference in the bedroom. Transgender people are people that find that the gender they identify most closely with isn't necessarily the sex that they were assigned with at birth. There are many different nuances within the transgender world, which I won't go into today, but it's generally a much more complex issue than simply wearing the clothes of another gender because you like the way they feel. So why do some men enjoy wearing women's underwear in the bedroom? If you speak to any man who enjoys this, you will find that there are a ton of reasons that differ from person to person, but there are a few key ones that tend to crop up time and time again. First one is that women's lingerie in general is made of much more sensual fabrics than men's. If you think of men's sexy underwear in general, you're probably thinking of black boxer shorts, glossy thongs worn by strippers, or even those satin boxers with the heart prints on them. Whereas for women, you've got a whole host of different fabrics and textures that you just don't get in men's lingerie, or certainly not as commonly. Another reason is that there's a kinky aspect to it, so it's something that people feel like they shouldn't be doing. Just as with many kinks and fantasies, many men find that it comes from this place of having something secret that no one knows that you're doing, and that is a thrill enough in itself. Plus, obviously, there's a sexy association with certain styles of lingerie, so why shouldn't men be able to investigate that as well? There are also some instances in BDSM relationships where a submissive man is often made to wear women's underwear by his dominant. It's known as sissy play, and it feeds into the whole humiliation aspect, which is very popular in certain areas of the BDSM world. But I should make this very, very clear, just because a man wants to wear sexy underwear in the bedroom does not necessarily mean that he is gay. Just like a man who enjoys anal stimulation doesn't necessarily want to go and have sex with other men, wearing women's underwear doesn't necessarily mean that they want to go and have sex with other men, or that they want to be another gender. It's simple as sensation in most cases. Because gender labels and gender identity have become much more fluid in recent years, we're starting to see a big increase in the number of men looking to explore the world of sexy women's lingerie.
Okay, for lecture activity number 2, I would like for you to think back on all the paraphilias we've covered today and tell me which one was the most surprising to you, the one maybe you hadn't heard about before or heard a lot about before. And then tell me why it was interesting or surprising to you. What was it about that kind of caught your attention for lecture activity number 2? So you can just write 2 to 3 sentences in response to that. All right, let's discuss treatment of paraphilias. It's important to point out that not everyone with a paraphilia needs or wants treatment. However, if the paraphilia creates significant problems for the perpetrator, the victims, friends, and family or society, then treatment is needed. So some of the reasons that people seek help is it's court-ordered because they feel a sense of distress from their paraphilia. It's causing distress in their relationship, or it's causing distress due to some type of sexual dysfunction. For example, like if you can't become aroused unless the fetish object is present. So success rates of therapy are measured by reports of reoffending from the judicial system and self-reports given to therapists. So studies show that 11% of treated sex offenders reoffend, and 18% of sex offenders that did not receive treatment reoffend. The earlier that treatment occurs, the more effective it is in lowering these recidivism rates. So the first type of treatment we're going to discuss is incorporation therapy. And incorporation therapy is a treatment for paraphilias in which the paraphilic behavior is decreased or modified to acceptable levels, but it's not completely abolished. It's usually successful in treating relationship distress. So usually it involves a milder form of paraphilic behavior so that the partner is not turned off, but the person can still become aroused. So for example, if there's a man who needs women's underwear to become aroused, then perhaps he can wear a silky shirt or a garter on his arm during sex if the underwear itself turns the partner off. And then another type of treatment is psychotherapy, which is also known as talk therapy. So there are cognitive behavioral therapy methods used to treat paraphilias, which are therapeutic approaches designed to gradually eliminate specific thoughts and associate behaviors that may be contributing to sexual problems. So cognitive behavioral therapy can involve aversion therapy or covert sensitization. So aversion therapy is a psychotherapy in which unwanted sexual behaviors and images are reduced by associating them with unpleasant stimuli, such as electric shocks, nauseous odors, or inducing vomit or nausea. And then covert sensitization is a type of aversion therapy in which instead of shocks or bad odors, the client repeatedly fantasizes about the unwanted behavior and then adds an extremely aversive event to the fantasy. So a pedophile might imagine the act and then imagine cops breaking in just before he's able to climax or have an orgasm. So also, psychotherapy techniques will use group therapy to stop denial and avoidance of the issue. These treatments also involve social skills that are used to train the person to foster healthy relationships. And these group therapy sessions will involve a 12-step program that's similar to Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay, so now we're going to watch a video clip from a show. I think it's called American Horror Story, not positive. But anyways, it is a depiction of aversion therapy where they use nausea associated with images that usually turn the person on to create kind of this negative association, so the person is no longer aroused by the pictures. In this clip, the person is receiving therapy in an effort to reverse her sexual orientation. So she's a lesbian, and this therapy is being used in an attempt to make her straight. However, we know that of course, does not work. So the reason I chose this clip is not because of what is trying to treat, but to show the method of how aversion therapy is used in the treatment of paraphilias. So this isn't something that psychologists would use to treat someone's sexual orientation because it's not a disorder. But this is how this treatment is used to treat paraphilias.
What is this stuff?
Apomorphine, a standard drug for this kind of cutting-edge aversion therapy. They use it at Harvard, Brigham Young, Cornell. The theory is that we're training your body to be physically repelled by certain triggers.
How did you get that?
From your house when I was there. I thought you might want it. Say when.
I need a few more minutes. I need a few minutes before the next one.
I'm very impressed with your determination, Lena. Let's take a break from that.
Okay, another type of treatment for paraphilias is called orgasmic reconditioning. And this is a type of therapy for paraphilias in which a person is conditioned to become aroused and have orgasms in socially acceptable settings that bear no resemblance to the paraphilia. So the person might masturbate using objects, fantasies, or images related to his paraphilia, and then just prior to orgasm switch to use something socially acceptable. So if successful, the person will redirect their urges towards these quote-unquote normal behaviors, and their paraphilic behavior will decrease. And then there are drug therapies. So drug therapy uses medication that decreases testosterone in an effort to lower the sex drive. The main type of drug used for this is Depo-Provera, the birth control shot. They do work, but they decrease the sex drive almost completely. They can actually cause breast development or erectile dysfunction, and many people eventually stop using the drug. Antidepressants, SSRIs, are usually effective in reducing paraphilic behaviors, fantasies, and urges as well. Alright, so for lecture activity 3, I would like for you to imagine that you are a psychologist and you have a client that is sexually aroused by teapots. And in order for them to get an erection, there has to be a teapot involved in the sexual act. So now that you have learned about the different treatments of paraphilias, what treatment would you, as the doctor, recommend for your client with the teapot fetish? So tell me your answer to that question in 2 to 3 sentences for lecture activity number 3. All right, that is it for this chapter. Don't forget to submit your lecture activities and complete all assignments associated with chapter 14. We will see you for the next lecture. Have a great day.